That's fine. Okay. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to join this event. Today we are very happy to welcome delegates from EFFAS to join us for the distinguished lecture series. So today's theme, as you can see here, is the myth and the misconceptions of sustainable investing, lessons from a quarter century of practical and academic experience. I think 25 years may sound a long time, but in this field, I think it's just maybe a couple rounds of regulations changes, a couple rounds of ratings overhauls, and maybe several battles between greening and greenwashing. Right? So I think today we're really happy to have an opportunity to welcome four kind of heavyweight speakers to join us, who have basically have journeys in both academia and practices, and they will be able to share with us their stories of bridging theory and practice on sustainable investing. So let me first introduce our speakers today. Today we have four speakers joining us and also one moderator. So first, let me introduce Dr. Jesus López Zaballos, the president of European Federation of Financial Analyst Societies, who is the key figure in shaping the professional education and standards on ESG and sustainable investing. So we also have Dr. Alexandra Pui, who is the Senior Vice President of Climate and Sustainability Consulting and Marsh Advisory, who is going to share with us his wealth of expertise from both the financial and insurance factors. We also want to welcome Dr. Valeria Fauner, who is the Director of Training and Certification of EFFAS. She has dedicated herself in advancing ESG standards in education and training and for professional development of the industry. Let's welcome her. We also have Dr. René Nicolodi, who is the head of equities and themes and the deputy head of asset management of Swiss Canal Invest, with a lot of experience in sustainable asset management. Welcome. And finally, we have Professor Anthony Zhenyu Zhang, who is our old friend and a great friend of us, who basically help us in developing teaching modules, who have been part-time, I think, instructor for our programs. Also, he's an, kind of in Hong Kong, everybody knows him on sustainable investing, and he has been very active in this field for many years. So welcome, Anthony. As we have many new friends here, especially the delegates from EFFAS, I would like to spend maybe 2 or 3 minutes to briefly introduce our institute. Okay, so can you please share the slides? Okay, not this one. 1 second. Okay, so I would like to introduce our institute first because we are relatively young. So we established last year, June. And now, but we have been growing very fast. Now we have in terms of administrative support, we have more than nearly 15 people helping us. Our research network has also significantly expanded. Within Hong Kong EU, we have more than 50 internal research affiliates. And we are also expanding our external research affiliates right now. So the number is also more than 50, right? So if you look at the size of our kind of research affiliates, I think it's already one of the largest sustainability center in Asia, focusing on business sustainability research. And also, if you look at our school, who is basically supporting our establishment, it was ranked in Asia #1 in business sustainability research. Just for your information, in the past 3 years, our research affiliates produced more than 50 papers, publications in top journals. Aside from that, right now we also provide a lot of public goods and support for faculty members and the public. So we have regular working paper series in which you're able to look at insights from academics in real time, right? So you don't have to wait for the lengthy publication time, but if you're interested, you can visit our website. And we regularly organize academic conferences, workshops, and seminars. And we also translate those findings into kind of human language, right? So a lot of times they're very complicated and math intensive, but we try to write research blogs for those papers so to make them easy to understand. And we also have best working paper prize. This is very different from most other publication prize or academic prize that emphasize the publication, right? We're at the early stage, we look at the working papers. So for every half year, we have best working papers that give out 4,000 US dollars per one paper. And then in terms of education, we're now already started working with a lot of organizations trying to promote education in this domain. So last year we have ESG case competition jointly with KPMG that attracted more than 1,700 submissions from more than 300 universities. And then we just launched the new program on Master of Sustainable Accounting and Finance, which we will welcome the first batch of students in the coming fall. And in addition, we try to integrate our kind of ESG and sustainable related trainings into our executive education programs, which are expanding across multiple streams. So in terms of public engagement, that's also a key efforts that we have. We have this ESG kind of distinguished lecture series. This is the third one, and we have the first one and the second one last year, and this in early this year. We also have forums that we're able to talk with policymakers. And lastly, we also have this very important events in which we welcome the Jane Goodall to come to Hong Kong U and share with the public about her experience of preserving the nature and the animals. Okay, so just a bit more teaser for the events. We also lead the Hong Kong Business School's first sustainability reports. So if you're interested, you can scan the QR code here and try to take a look at the kind of the breadth and the research that our school is providing. Right now, across the entire school, we have more than 30 kind of ESG related courses. And that's kind of spanning across undergraduates, graduate, and PhD levels. And then as I mentioned, we publish a lot of papers in leading journals. And we also provide a lot of community work, right? So in last year, we spent almost 150,000 hours of work to support more than 50 social impact organizations through our impact lab. And if you look at the gender balance, we're doing very well. We have 58 female students and 29 female faculty members. And in terms of carbon emissions that we're trying to really cut down in the coming years, we have different campuses and centers in mainland China, in Hong Kong, and also in Europe. We in total emitted a little less than 4,000 tons of carbon emissions that we were trying to bring down. Well, this is a very short kind of introduction of our institutes. Now, before I pass the mic to the keynotes and to our guests, I would like to kind of emphasize 3 reasons why we're gathering here today. The first is about the macro side, right? So now with Trump returns, we're seeing dramatic changes on regulations, on kind of renewable energy policies, on climate actions, and on anti-ESG kind of legislations, right? So many states in the US has rules and regulations that were carried forward that's trying to basically say no to ESG investment or explicitly trying to say no in terms of how you allocate your assets, right? So I think, in my opinion, the current US administration's environmental strategy is basically, as Trump says, drill, baby drill, right? While the rest of the world is trying to say renew, maybe let's renew, right? So if you look at the China's industries in the past few years, it's all about how we develop larger renewable energies and how we apply those energies across sectors. And it's almost, for me, it's almost like the idea of making America great again is making America polluting again, right? So if you think about all those regulations about fossil fuels and loosen of those regulations, that would be the consequences. And another reason, if you think about today is Earth Day, right? So this is a perfect occasion to remind ourselves that sustainability is more than just a buzzword. And I think I just want to share one insight with you. Today we're talking about sustainable investing. The studies try to estimate what would happen, for example, if we allocate all the pension funds to green and ESG related following those compliances. Basically, the estimates that if we're moving pensions to green investment, that would have more than 20 times larger the impact of giving up all the travels we have, like flights and all that, or switching to energy saving bulbs, or eating less meat, right? That's the power of how financial institutions try to divert or change their ways of investing can have on the entire world. And finally, I want to emphasize we're in Hong Kong today, so we're very happy to have these delegates from Europe. I think while US is kind of zigzagging about sustainable investing, ESG, and all that, but Europe and Asia, especially in Hong Kong, are forging the power and forging the efforts together to moving things forward. As I have introduced in our business school, it's kind of screenshots, right? Very tiny parts of these efforts that we try to emphasize. So I think Hong Kong is really in a very unique position to unite or to kind of bring collaborations from both Europe and Asia together. So without further ado, let's welcome our speakers today and to share with us their thoughts and findings. So first, Doctor. Slides? Okay, I can speak.
Well, I have to say good morning to everybody, ladies and gentlemen. I have prepared a very large official speech, but I think we are all of us, we are colleagues, friends, so I prefer not to do this. As you know, I'm a Spanish, so let's see how can I speak in English and say that I have to say we are really proud to be here. I want to thank Professor and the Hong Kong University to allow us to be here again. I promised last year that we'll try to come every year once to share with you all what we are doing in EFFAS. EFFAS is the European Federation of Financial Analysts. We were founded in 1962. We are more than 16 large countries in Europe, and we represent more than 20,000 investment professional and financial analysts, and we have nowadays over 40,000 certified professionals in not only in Europe, also nowadays in Asia. No? I have to say that the last figures, I'm going to give you some very confidential information because we know the exams that we did weeks ago regarding the TESGA diploma, and now we reach 8,000 TESGA holders all around the world in more than 60 countries. So first of all, if there is any people here who do the exams in the last session, congratulations if you pass the exams. No? Well, today it's not important that I speak as chairman because today we have experts from our faculty that they are going to do the better speech than me. But just one more information, as you know, our compromise with our TESGA holders is the continuous training. EFFAS is focused in, okay, you obtain our 35 diplomas, what else? No? So as I told before to the professor, we update it every year, the TESGA. We invest a lot of money. We are non-for-profit organization, so we invest in research and in updating our TESGA diploma. But the good news today is that EFFAS is going to launch in collaboration or with the help of Marsh McLennan, we have developed a new climate risks diploma. So I think not later end of May or June, we are going to launch in the market a new diploma. So I hope that mostly of the TESGA holders will continue study the climate risks diploma with us. Nothing else. Of course, I'm going to be here later. So if any one of you want to speak with me, I'm more than happy to answer all your questions. And now, Professor, I think it's much better if the expert take the floor and explain what they have to say so we can learn much more. Thank you.
Okay, so now let's welcome Dr. Alexandra Pui to share with us.
Morning, everyone. It's great to be in Hong Kong. And thanks again for the invite from Professor Guojun and also our partners in EFFAS. I'm wearing quite a few hats today, so I'll just maybe explain myself a little bit. First and foremost, I'm working at, as it says there, Marsh Advisory. So it's a large multinational firm that primarily provides broking services, right, insurance industry related, but I'm in the climate and sustainability division. I'm also a newly minted EFFAS faculty member. Thank you, Dr. Jesús and Valeria. And also I'm still sort of like an academic, part-time academic, as an adjunct fellow at the Climate Change Research Centre in Australia at the University of New South Wales. I'm currently based in Tokyo, but I've got a few affiliations. So with that, yeah, we'll dive in. The challenges in physical climate risks and disclosures. So as Professor Guojun mentioned earlier, there maybe, let's say, differing views about what physical climate risk means. So we'll try to dive into that a little bit and what it means for practitioners in this area where you've got more climate stress tests coming out, you've got more disclosures, TCFD, ISSB. So we're trying to make sense a little bit of that, okay? Next slide, please. I can move it myself. Yeah, and Professor Guojun already stole my quote earlier, right? Yeah, so this is just to really set the scene for today. It's really to show that there are very different views that evolve with time and even a short span of time. So if we go back a couple of years, I think there was this quote, if some of you might remember in the room, about climate change not being a financial risk that investors in particular need to worry about, because the more you mention climate catastrophe, the higher prices go up. So that was quite a, like a prominent individual in the investment market who's now, I think, with Financial Times. And then if you skip forward to a year, and this is the US Fed Reserve. So it's important to understand this was pre-Donald Trump, right? And they were actually conducting a climate scenario analysis. Who in the room here is familiar with climate scenario analysis? Because that will be a common theme I'll be coming back to. That's really my background. So I've yeah, just diverging a little bit. My background's actually in insurance, mainly with a bit of banking, and I've been pricing for climate risks for quite a long time. Because if you think about property catastrophe insurers, that's essentially the climate risks they're pricing for. Today's climate risks as well as earthquakes and all the other things. But it's important to see that, Governor Chris Waller had a view on climate risks, and he said that, well, it's important, but it shouldn't merit special treatment relative to other kind of risks, like geopolitical risks, interest rate risks, right? And then finally, obviously, we've got Donald Trump here, latest view from the US. So I think this really begs three questions. The first is physical climate risks are negligible, don't need to worry about it. But since we're in a financial setting here, maybe it's because it's already baked into pricing. Maybe it's already been factored into pricing. So it's okay, right? The discount is already discounted for. Or is there a possibility that all the investors are wrong collectively? So just want you to have a think about that as we go through today's talk. So coming to the climate disclosure space, we've been, this isn't something very new. I think since 2015 in particular, and maybe even before that, maybe René will have a better view on that. We've really been disclosing environmental factors, climate disclosures in a voluntary way, right? Until more recently. And I think I think while it's a good thing to be disclosing, there are significant gaps and challenges here. So for example, why is it that maybe climate risk disclosures are maybe not as good as they can be, right? Is it because of they're not really used in investment decisions broadly, right? Is it because of the low quality of the disclosures, or is it because of the low utilization of these disclosures themselves? So is there a chicken and egg problem that we see here, right? So yeah, something to think about, all these. I won't go through them every single one, but something to think about, right? And here, I mean, there's a lot of text on the screen, but just to give you a sense for the quality of physical climate disclosures from international banks. So these banks are all large cap, very large, all multinational, and around the world. So there's only a grand sample size of 3 here, but I want to draw your attention to some of the sort of challenges that we see in general, which is if you look at bank A here, it's a very brief methodological overview, very generic qualitative disclosure. So it just says, well, we've done some credit risk, market risk, operational risk, you know, factors, and we've looked into that. And they're really just stating very generic things, not much detail going on. So how are you going to use that for investments? And what about Bank B? It's a little bit better, right? You can see, well, they've given some attempt at rating, but for today's value, what about tomorrow's value? What about the futures, right? And only the baselines presented, but all 3 of them, as you can see, if you go up all the way up to Bank C, all 3 do not address the sources of uncertainty, because with climate change, it's a very uncertain future. You know, we're just talking this morning, IPCC, 6th version now, and then there's a 7th one coming, and they've been revising their estimates with each IPCC report. So is everyone familiar with the IPCC in this room? I assume so. Yeah. And yeah, even for bank number C here, yeah, no results are provided. We've done the analysis, but there's no result. So I don't know how we're supposed to make sense of that. But the signs are positive, right? There's ISSB aligned mandatory climate risk disclosure on the way. And good to say that Hong Kong is actually, yeah, ahead of the curve. Well, the first group to report is a little bit later, but they've committed to it. Personally, I've done a couple of stress tests as well for HKMA. So I can tell that the regulators are very much on the ball, very much invested and interested to improve the capability of the you know, financial sector in particular to better understand climate risks. And you can see across APAC region as well, I think there's a concerted move in the right direction. And hopefully this doesn't change, right, with recent geopolitics. But moving on, this slide is just to show, this is for, it's sort of generic and for, let's say, a bank or financial institution in terms of how climate impact assessment is conducted, either for stress tests or for disclosure. And this is really scenario analysis. So focusing on the risk element, right? But it's just to show that there's a lot of uncertainty involved in this chain, and also that it's very complex, right? So this isn't like the only way you could do it. But for example, it starts very simply on this side, on the left-hand side, where you've got global scenarios. I mentioned IPCC earlier, and the CMIP is actually what the IPCC relies on in terms of coming up with their sort of, yeah, updates, right? It's the CMI, the coupled model intercomparison project there, CMIP, is basically a bunch of global models that they use to predict sort of project temperature futures according to different scenarios, right? So you might have heard of RCP 8.5, RCP 4.5, and the SSPs and so forth, right? And then later you've got the NGFS scenarios that sort of come in and being more used for transition risk elements, or even for target setting, you've got the IEA scenarios, International Energy Agency. But the whole point is all these global scenarios are not granular enough to perform the analysis for a single entity or even for at a governmental or regional level. So you've got to have this, what they call a downscaling step that occurs, and this introduces uncertainty. And you can see that the actors there are typically academia or regulators, and then you've got climate data service providers, because you know it's almost impossible for one particular entity to be across everything. So let's say you're a financial institution, you're here doing the climate impact assessment, you're really relying on the quality of the analysis from global scenarios and the regionalization, right? And then the task then for the practitioners on this side of the chart is to make sense of what does it mean for your organization, right? So, what does your organization look like? Are you focused more on the supply chain side of things? Are you focused more on, assets that might be damaged from, let's say, sea level rise? And then even for transition risks as well, really depends on the carbon intensity of your assets where they are. And finally, the management. It's not just good enough to be able to assess, but nowadays with these increasing disclosure requirements, you're also required to talk about how and disclose how you're managing that, how you're monitoring for it. So that's all on the far end right there, the response. Obviously, data comes into play, the ability to collect that data, make sense of that data, and store that data, just to give you a sense. So if there was one general criticism that I often hear in the practitioner world, but also in academic world, it's this one here. Remember we talked about climate futures, right? What the IPCC projects, and they're projecting temperature futures. In finance or in economics, Professor Gorjun might have an expert view as well. Keen to hear it later. It's about what damages are we looking at? Why do we need to adapt to climate if, let's say, the social cost of carbon or the cost of climate change is so low, which is what's being predicted right here? What if I told you we're all on that blue line right here, even in a 4 or 5 degree future, you see? And these lines, as I'll show in the next chart, are actually predicted by Nobel Prize winners like William Nordhaus, right? Doing these sort of analyses. What if we're not there, but we're on some other kind of curve? Hopefully not exponential, but even on a logistic one. You're talking about damages as a percentage of GDP. And by the way, if you want to look at this is actually not just the absolute figure of the GDP. It's a deviation, right, from the pathways. So it's still assuming some kind of growth. It's just that it's growing at, some less. It's growing at this like gap, right? Um, and yeah, this is definitely something that has gotten a lot of people in the scientific community as well as the economics community thinking about this a bit more. But right now, for all the stress tests around the world that we see, most of them are using the NGFS NIGEM model. So NIGEM's just a macroeconomic model that's embedded within NGFS, and it's actually following this damage function, right? That really just regresses GDP onto like I'm oversimplifying here, but elapsed climate change. So that's what we've already seen so far in terms of GDP, global basis, but that's what's happening here. And I know this one's actually quite a lot to take in, but I'll try to get through it. I think it's important to really show what's being used by policymakers, stress testers, and even those disclosing at the moment, because they're only following what they're being told, right? So Nordhaus, I know he cops a lot of it because he's one of the first ones to put it out there. But yeah, enumerative methods, statistical, right? So he's actually doing that regression that we talked about because we are already sitting at 1.5 or thereabouts today from the pre-industrial era. Today, we are already at 1.5 degrees warmer than we were on a global basis, right? So this one's quite interesting because enumerative is good in terms of going by sector. So let's say agricultural sector, right? What's your financial services sector and manufacturing and so forth. And then you add them all up to come up with your overall damage. But what if agriculture is only, let's say, 3 to 5% of your GDP and agriculture goes down, right? And in a future world, you're not able to import food, right? Because climate change may be systemic in nature. It's not just, weather shocks here. It's weather shocks in other parts of the world as well. You know, what does that mean for the other sectors, the flow-on impacts? And then some others, they don't use that sectoral approach, but they use the whole of economy approach and they go with temperature. They just use temperature as the only predictor. And some others get a little bit better, like Kalku and Wentz, they go, well, there's actually sea level rise baked into it. There's a little bit more, maybe precipitation. So they just do more and more. But then on the right-hand side, then you got, some other emerging, what I'll call emerging sort of views that are not picked up so far by the policymakers, right? But these are very scary ones. These are the ones that you saw that had that narrative with the logistic curve or the exponential curve. And they really provide some idea of what the tipping points could be, right? The Atlantic Meridional overturning current. So if that current stops, some of you might watch Day After Tomorrow, something like that could happen, right? And then even this one, was interesting. That's where I got the idea of the global weather shocks, because they're actually saying, well, we're actually picking up these models, but we're relaxing those assumptions about local versus global weather shocks, and then getting to much higher damage estimates there. So suffice to say, this is a very emerging area, and it's a lot to take in for a practitioner. So it's important to capability build starting now. But this is the practicality we face, right? We'd like to learn all that. We'd like to do as many courses as we can and have as much interaction with as many experts as we want to. But the practical challenges for preparers of disclosure is, the cost. And also the disclosure, level disclosure. You do not want to unfairly, let's just say you own a fishery somewhere, right? And the water is getting too hot. The seawater is getting too hot to actually keep operating at a particular efficiency or to get the yield up to what you want it to be. Or you got to pump more antibiotics into the fish, right? And that's not good. And should you be disclosing something like that, right? In a future where sea surface temperatures are getting warmer, and you've got to move that fishery somewhere else, but then you're going to move it into your neighbor, right? Because of geopolitical borders, you can't just keep moving it further south or further north, right? To get to cooler waters. Just something to think about. And also that has to be balanced with disclosure quality. As we mentioned earlier, banks A to C, not much we can do about that. And those are major banks, right, in the world. So like, it's this tension that I think I want to just bring out today. And finally, if we get that right, more or less, hopefully there'll be benefits to the users, which is the investors, for improved valuations, for pricing, more accurate pricing of these climate risks, and also for the preparers as well. Because if there's more trust in their way they manage this risk, they could unlock greater investment in capital, enhance operational resilience, and investor engagement, confidence. So benefits are also very, they're very persuasive towards trying to solve for this. So I think I'll try to skip this slide in a, sort of for time, and rather focus on this one. So I've tried to make sense of this whole ecosystem of the physical risk space, but I do believe that this center here is incredibly important. The standard developers, right, ISSB, they come up with what should be done, right? And then they are picked up by the regulators, by the HKMA or the Hang Seng, the stock exchanges, which then mandate, right, the firms that are involved there to disclose. And then obviously those that are using those disclosures to make a decision and inform investment. But that's the core, and everything around it is also incredibly important to support that core, right? Because it requires these guys to do their job right, right? To be able to better inform the developers, the standards, right? Do they make sense? And then also the researchers as well, because they feed into here, right? And I think this is not by no means exhaustive. This is by no means everything, but it's something I've been thinking about. And then even the audit and assurance, right? So yeah, do they have the expertise to be able to really audit, for climate and for all the complexities and even nature these days? So just to close, I think it's really important, and it's very evident from this that there needs to be more capability built across this whole spectrum, and there needs to be transfer interdisciplinary support, right? In terms of that knowledge, it's so broad. There's economics, there's physical climate, there's nature, right? There's finance. So it really requires all the actors to come together and really work together to be able to effect a better outcome. Otherwise, we're all just maybe steering in our own little silos, and it's not a great outcome, as you could see before in some of those studies. That's why I think, going back, something I forgot to mention is like the involvement of physical climate risk experts in these papers. None. Not sure whether they not saying that they didn't collaborate or they did not consult, but there was nobody on the authorship that was a physical climate risk expert. So with that, I'll hand it over to René. Thank you.
So thank you very much for having me here, and thank you also for the presentation. try to keep up with the level. So um, for a start, when I tried to make the slides, I thought about, well, what should be the key message? And basically, I think it's important for you to know where I'm coming from, because this will be a highly subjective perspective on sustainable investment over quite a few years. Um, I studied at the University of Zurich. I did a PhD on sustainable investing in 2006, but I'm a master in English literature and economic law, so nothing to do with the investment world. Have been entering the investment world in 2002 as a sustainability analyst before the term ESG was coined. I was responsible to integrate the G, okay, 2002, Enron scandals and Parmalat and WorldCom. So I was tasked to do that. Um, since then, 2006, I'm a teacher at different universities in Switzerland, outside of Switzerland. So I'm in the academia. I founded, co-founded, and a board member of a startup in the energy efficiency area. And I'm heading up, that's my main job, basically, the equity department of Swisscanto Invest. So Swisscanto Invest is the second largest asset manager in Switzerland after UBS. We manage 300 billion of assets for institutional clients, pension funds, insurance companies, family offices, and launched our sustainability research in 1994. Okay, it's quite a while ago, and we've been on the track since then. Okay, we've continuously developed, never stepped back, always went a step further with regard to our sustainability engagement for a variety of reasons. And I'm a father of 3 sons, so I also look forward to have a future which is livable for them, for the next generations. Okay, that's the background. And with that background, I'm looking from a top-down perspective of what has been happening to sustainable investing for the past roughly 25 years. Where are we standing today? And what will be potentially the questions, or what will be the questions that we need to answer for the next few years? Okay, so let me start. Sustainable investing, extremely important and nothing special. Here I borrow from a quote from Professor Edmonds. Okay, probably many of you know him, and it's absolutely true. Okay, who knows this company here? Okay, this is the Dutch East India Company, first listed equity in the world, 1602. Lived for 200 years, was governmentalized in 1799, I think. Okay, why I put this picture here? Corporate governance issues from the very start. Okay. Business model was quite clear. I import spices from Asia. Government structure, highly complex. Payment, conflicts of interest, no diversity in the board, proxy voting, no dividends, huge messes, and the shareholders were running on the street and fighting for their right. Okay. We have the same issues today with many companies on the governance side. No changes. 400 years later, on the corporate governance side, yes, we have much more regulations, but it's kind of integrated in the way we look at companies. So in that sense, sustainable investing is just about doing good investment decisions and using available information to do that. Okay, think about the first sustainable investment fund. Okay, 1928 Pioneer Fund, still exists. Okay, and therefore, the tools we use for sustainable investing that we used when I started the industry are still the same ones: exclusions, screening, best-in-class approaches, thematic approaches, stewardship, proxy voting, engagement, still the same. 25 years. The tools, the original tools are the same and will probably still be the same for the future, but the professionalization, the sophistication in using these tools to make better investment decisions has developed over time. So this guy here, that's Adam Smith. Okay, basically it's the founder of modern economics. Two relevant books you need to read. One is The Wealth of Nations, Invisible Hand, market competition, supply, demand, no regulation, the market will deal with it, the invisible hand. The other book is The Theory of Moral Sentiment, okay, which basically tells you on an individual level, you need to have empathy, You need to understand the needs of the other person, okay, in order then to maybe reassess the invisible hand of the market. It's a balance between free market and caring about, okay? So sustainable investing, obviously, it's a lot about values, about norms, about cultural setups, okay? The view on sustainability in Europe might not be exactly the same as the view in Asia or in Hong Kong. And it's obviously definitely not the view that you have in the United States currently, okay? So these are changes over time, okay? So just think about the discussions we're having in Europe about sustainable investing and values. Defense, okay, was largely excluded for basically all the sustainable investment strategy. And now a lot of pension funds are discussing, well, should we actually exclude defense companies? Because basically we need to defend ourselves and keep up democracy. Point one. Nuclear energy. After Chernobyl, and I was in Chernobyl, I visited the site. It's an impressive site, by the way, but nuclear energy was largely excluded from all the sustainable investment strategies. Well, it's carbon neutral. Well, you need to look at the risks, the cost of the risks, and so on and so forth, but a lot of value-based discussions about nuclear energy. GMO, food security. Do I allow GMO? Is it safe? Is it not safe? It's more driven by values and beliefs than other things. And therefore, it's an important thing to remind ourselves. And therefore, from a sustainability or investment perspective, materiality is really important. Okay, and materiality is a concept that is highly dynamic. Okay, think about financial materiality, which is obviously something that we need care a lot as an investor, fiduciary duty towards our clients. So we need to do good investments, be prudent, be diligent in the way we manage their money. Well, with Professor Moskowitz coining the phrase of efficient markets many, many years ago in the 70s, well, fiduciary duty was focused on maximizing returns. Maximizing returns. And that was it. Well, the term over time changed. Now you maximize risk-adjusted returns. Okay? From returns only to risk-adjusted returns. That's a big change because maximizing returns with a certain level of risk is a different ballgame. Okay? And now you ask yourself, well, what kind of risks should I take in? Is it just financial risk? And what drives financial risk? And then we come back to the presentation of Alex, which obviously focuses also on non-financial climate risk, which have a huge impact. And therefore, the concept of fiduciary duty, just from a financial economic point of view, obviously has changed a lot over the past 20 years. A lot of reports also from a legal voice and sustainability, ESG themes and information are widely regarded as part of the fiduciary duty of institutional investors, and they should care about it. Okay. Now, alpha. Alpha is the return above the benchmark that I should generate if I do a good job as an investor. Now, many asset managers sell sustainable investing as being a better product, generates more money than any other. Now, there's rooms filled with academic studies on the performance of sustainable investing. Okay? In general, the view is positive. Now, I give you a practical experience over 25 years. Yes, they do generate alpha. Okay, yes, you can generate an outperformance while managing sustainably. Okay, but it's not just when you change the name and change the name of the product, make it sustainable, and then it will generate alpha. It's not just using ESG data and it will generate outperformance. That's not the way it works. Sustainable information per se, standalone, is not an alpha generator. You need skill on the portfolio manager level. So a good portfolio manager, which is able to capture information from ESG sources, will have the better probability to increase his performance. A bad portfolio manager will not become a good portfolio manager just by using ESG information. Okay, it's very basic, but it's very important to understand that. So you don't sell sustainable investing just with a better performance. You need to capture, and for that you need knowledge, skill set, and education to do that. Okay. Regulatory playing field. So we've heard about the ISSB as being one of the, say, globally standards, but before that, there are many others, and standards, global standards are really, really important for the global investor community. Why? Because they allow us to speak a similar language. Okay, when I go back in time, 2002, 2003, there was the beginning of the GRI reporting, Global Reporting Initiative. Just a very few percentage of the companies were reporting according to the GRI. And then it increased massively. And that allowed my job to be much easier because basically you had a certain frame of reference with regard to reporting. You had more data, not necessarily better quality, but more data. And it allowed us to construct better portfolios, okay? And that we had a kind of standard regarding reporting initiatives. Think about the growth of MSCI ratings, ESG ratings. You can think about ESG ratings or MSCI is doing whatever you want, if it's good or bad, it doesn't matter, but it allowed the standardization and the standardized discussion about the value of ratings. And that helped the sophistication among institutional asset owners all over the world. Think about the GDP protocol. Think about the ISSB, the latest. So this will allow a common understanding about basics, information, setups, accounting, and that is absolutely key. Reduce complexity, increase standardization. That will help to scale up capital flow over time. Okay, current status. The current status of the relationship is complicated, okay? And it's complicated because, well, we know we move from euphoria to opposition, okay? So we have a lot of backlash, and it's not just coming because we have a new president in the United States. It just started a few years earlier. I would say starting from 2023, 2024, you had certain anti-ESG, anti-Vogue regulation coming in the United States. And does this bother me personally? No, actually not, because it's a cycle, okay? And it's not the first one, to be honest. We had a massive cycle in 2004 with regard to green climate investments, renewable investors, solar investors, which got crushed, totally crushed around 2007, 8, and 9 with the financial crisis, okay? And it survived and it came back, okay? It got crushed again with the European credit crisis in 2013, 14, 15. Sustainable investing was not a big topic back then in these years because credit crunches, inflation, joblessness, many other economic close things were just top of the line. Now it's tariffs, it's political divergences, but that's not a problem. It will come back because the sustainability issues and challenges that we have are here to stay. They don't care about Trump. The climate is warming with or without Trump. So that's important. That's here to stay. The challenges are here to stay, and it costs money. And the money comes from capital flows, okay? And that's is something that maybe short term we worry, but on the long term, it's just a cyclical thing. We need to rearrange ourselves and think about how we work around certain developments, and that's a very important message. So let me talk about velocity and speed, okay? So speed describes an object moving from A to B with how fast the object moves. Okay. Velocity gives the direction, okay, includes the direction, okay, and direction is very important, okay, in which direction, with what speed am I moving, okay. Now think about that with regard to sustainable investing, and you see here the United States is a little bit in the shade and will remain a little bit in the shade for the next few months probably with regard to sustainability. But the link between Europe and Asia, China, is a very important one with regard to direction and speed, okay? Because the EU has set up a framework, and I will talk about it's also a problem, but has at least given direction with regard to sustainability issues for companies, for investors, and Asia and China are doing the same, okay? And we've heard it about your comments, and I think that connection, that relationship in order to move capital and initiatives for sustainability changes to align in capital flows, institutional investor, pension funds, sovereign funds, with regard to these issues, among these two players, which are very committed, is an absolutely opportunity in this point of time. Okay. Now, what is the problem? The problem is often complexity. Okay, we've seen the presentation of Alex. It's hugely complex. Okay, not many people understand the details of climate risk scenario based. Okay, why? Because it's scientifically hugely complex. So we have no clear view. Is it 1.3 we are now, 1.5? Where are we going? 3, 2, 4? What is happening? Is it linear? Is it escalating? We don't know. So scientifically based, high uncertainty. At the same time, it implies high behavioral changes. Okay? So high behavioral changes with high scientific complexity. And that creates messy, wicked problems that we need to solve. And that's not an easy one. And usually on the investment side, you want to reduce any kind of complexity. You want to make decisions based on, yes, we need to take in science, we need to take in many things, but already you are faced with an incredible amount of information. You need to reduce complexity and focus on the KPIs that are material and relevant over short, mid, and long term. That's absolutely crucial. And that's a thing that we need to remind ourselves on and on. Also with regard to regulation. So the EU regulation is a good thing. It gives velocity, it gives direction. At the same time, it's hugely complex. Okay, you need to simplify, to reduce complexity in order to get the action going. So regain simplicity is absolutely crucial. Let me make an example. We integrated a CO2 reduction target for all our active strategies back in 2019. Okay, we took the IPCC data. Back then it was for the 1.5 degree reduction target, we talked about 480 gigatons of CO2 available. For the 2 degree target, it was 1,080 gigatons of CO2 available. And then you can make a calculation of the reduction to zero, and you get up to, I think it's 4% reduction every year for the 2 degree and 7.5% reduction of CO2 every year to the indefinite for every portfolio in absolute terms, not relative to benchmarks, absolute terms. And we did that for 140 billion of assets. And that was not a democratic decision. Okay, so we as the, like I said, the management of the asset management decided that every portfolio needs to follow that curve. Okay, that was 5 years ago. And we learned a lot about it because changing the carbon impact of a portfolio over time, reducing every year by 7.5% your CO2 emissions of a portfolio has an impact on allocation setups, okay? The broader the portfolio is, global equities, check, it works. The more narrow and more, let's say, the investment universe is more small, the more complicated the things becomes over time. And I think many people don't understand what is the implication of integrating, for instance, climate risk or reduction targets into portfolios. That's not an easy thing to do, okay, because it has an implication on the risk-return profile for the future. Very important thing, and therefore you need to regain simplicity with regard to such elements and understand very well what is the portfolio implication of ESG in every single second. So therefore, smaller steps usually bring bigger changes. Okay, if you do the steps too large, nothing will happen because everybody stands there and is overwhelmed with complexity, and therefore small steps are really important. Okay, small but directed with a certain pace and continuity. That also means that if now you have you see companies changing names. Okay, they take away the ESG, they take away the diversity program, they take away many things, and you need to be consistent. Okay, and not just move around because things have changed a little bit in the environment around. Be consistent, follow your strategy, follow the steps, the small steps, step by step, with regard to sustainability issues, and that gives you credibility over time. Okay, for us, it has been the story for 30 years. We're not changed, not even a little bit. We need to take care about our stakeholders, but the direction is absolutely crucial. And that gives you credibility and will be good for business in the future. Instead of moving around, entering a net zero asset management initiatives, getting out another year back, this flip siding is not a good strategy here. This is an important one, skill gap. Okay, we have a huge skill gap. So in the past 5 years, I've been talking about sustainability and ESG with auditors, with compliance officers, with legal guys, with marketing guys, with sales guys. Everybody was talking to me about ESG and sustainability with a very, very, very low level of understanding about all these matters. And therefore, education is absolutely crucial. Why is it crucial? Because you need to speak the same language. If you don't speak the same language along a value chain, you face problems, takes time and cost, and I would even go a step further, you face reputational risks because if A doesn't understand what B wants to say and does something, you create greenwashing scandals, you pay fines. Many asset managers have done exactly that, not necessarily because they wanted to cheat, because they just simply didn't understand what they're doing. They didn't understand what they're doing, and that links back to education. Especially in such topics as climate risk, education is absolutely crucial because you need to understand at least the basics in order to make decisions on the investment side, but also in other areas of the business. The future. So this guy is Sisyphus. Okay, it's from Greek mythology. Sisyphus was killed by Hades, and not killed, but was basically what he cheated death, and Zeus put him to a task. He needs to roll up a stone up the mountain forever and ever and ever. It's a symbol of the futility of life, okay, which is negative. At the same time, it's about persistence. Okay, it's about believing and persistence and doing the things again and again and again. Okay, making sense again. And therefore, also with regard to sustainability and sustainable investing and ESG, you need persistence. So I started in the industry 2002. The topic was zero. You were laughed at. Laughed. People were laughing. What are you doing in sustainability? That's not a business. Go into private equity and hedge funds. It's more fun. Sustainability, it's not a business. Things change. Okay, things change, but you need to keep consistency and persistency. A little bit like Sisyphus, going on and roll that stone up the hill until maybe someday you will kick out the stone on the other side of the mountain. Okay, and therefore consistency is key. We talk about greenwashing a lot. Okay, and greenwashing can be avoided with transparency. You can change things. That's not a problem. You can adapt, evolve. This area is highly dynamic. The way we look at data today is totally different than 20 years ago. I have much more data. The problem is quality, okay? It's not necessarily quantity, it's quality. Before it was quantity and not quality. And therefore, how you deal with data in a very transparent way, how you manage regulation, disclosure, in a transparent way, it directly links to greenwashing. And therefore, that's a thing you need to be very aware of also in the future. And therefore, understanding regulation, accounting standards is absolutely crucial in that sense. Now, that's a stereotypical value chain of an investment manager. Starts with asset acquisition. You talk to clients, you make investments, you manage the portfolios. Okay, 3 areas, 1, 2, 3, several steps, marketing, sales, client services, and so on, okay? And usually, we just talk about ESG information in this part here, investment selection, which is wrong. Wrong, why? Because the instruction and education of the client about sustainable investment starts here. Okay, how do I onboard a client? Does the client understand what the exclusion criteria means for his portfolio? Does he want to have reach Paris-aligned climate goals? Does he know what it means for his portfolio? Is he able to make this decision on a sound way? That's very important. Then, what about asset allocation, investment selection? Okay, obviously, that's pretty straightforward. You need to work with the data and the tools. But in the back, stewardship, engagement, proxy voting, use the rights in the interaction with companies. So we are one of the largest owner of, for instance, Swiss equities, 30 billion. So we are in the top 5 owners of every single Swiss company, Nestle, Novartis, Roche, UBS, Zurich, Swiss Re, and we hold SIM. We use our power as asset owner to have very direct discussions with the board of the president, with the CEO, with regard also to sustainability issues, corporate governance, climate risk. So think about Holcim, Lafarge Holcim, largest cement producer in the world. Well, CO2 is absolutely crucial. Top line, bottom line, risk, absolutely crucial. I want to understand as an investor what's the trajectory of their CO2 emission portfolio with regard to their top and bottom line. It's absolutely crucial to understand what they're doing. And therefore, you need to look at sustainable investing as a value chain from the beginning to the end and understand every single step. That's absolutely important. Now, efficiency at the cost of efficacy. Efficacy is doing things right is efficiency, and doing the right things is efficacy. And efficacy is key. So it's not just about using more data, it's about using the right data for the right strategy. Maybe fixed income works a little bit different than equity. Obviously, private equity, no data available, works different than listed equity. Infrastructure is something else, that high yield emerging market. So just using whatever kind of data in whatever kind of investment strategy will not work. So therefore, do the things right is absolutely crucial. AI will help, will make us more productive. But I assume for the time being, let's say the next 5 to 10 years, the human touch within AI will still remain very important. Okay, this is technology will develop, but the use of different methodologies of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and other things will still be driven by humans for the time being. Okay, that's very important. Last 2 slides, touching on climate change. Front loading, the long-term agenda. Okay, front loading means we better move capital now into certain areas than tomorrow, because tomorrow will be more expensive. Highly likely, highly likely. So McKinsey talks about 275 trillion of investments needed from 2020 to 2050 to decarbonize the world. It's about 9%, 8.8% on average over the next 30 years of global GDP. Yearly, 9.2 trillion US dollars. And we need to add up, to get this 9.2 trillion, you need to add up 3.5 trillion. That's a lot of money. Okay, that money won't come from states. There's not enough money there. It needs to come from asset owners, global investors, sovereign funds, family offices, whatever wealth is around. And in order to do that, you need to have also a good business case about materiality. Okay, it's about understanding physical risk, transition risk. It's about understanding risk-return perspectives on the short, mid, and long term. And that's a complex thing to do, but you need to do it now and not tomorrow. Okay, you need to do it now, because it's going to be more expensive in the future, and time is running away. It's running away, obviously, because of that. Okay, that's the classic climate chart. The Earth is getting hotter, according to different sources, 1.3, currently 1.5, depends a little bit, but it's definitely getting hotter, and you will feel the differences in climate changes all over the world. And therefore, the risk perceptions in financial markets, according to the climate change science, is still evolving. We are, on average, we are nowhere, to be honest. So we know about CO2 data, we know about the climate scenarios, but the implementation into praxis is at the very, very beginning still. And I'm saying that to you after 25 years working in the area, after 5 years really doing the decarbonization of portfolios. It's very, very in the beginning. Let me make one example. We still use scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, but we know scope 3 is roughly 80% of the story. It's scope 3, but we use scope 1. Why? Because there's no good understanding and availability of scope 3 data. As soon as you start to use scope 3 data, all your models go nuts because you have double accounts, you don't have enough data. It's crazy. So we work with scope 1 and scope 2. We have the scope 3 data in the systems, but are not able to integrate them on a systematic basis because the quality is just not there yet. So just a small step. It's one data point, okay? But we're not there yet. So takeaways. Though the times are maybe a little bit difficult in some regions of the world, this is here to stay. Okay, absolutely convinced. Will not change, will not go away. And therefore, the educational effort you do now in the university or with the EFFAS, SESCA, and climate risk certificates is something that is going to pay out for sure. Adaptation sometimes requires simplification. Okay, you need to make things simpler to make smaller steps with bigger impact. Okay, you know that maybe the complexity and the details are not correct, are not special, but you move at least in smaller steps because it's simpler. If you have too much complexity, the system shuts down and gets blocked and you don't move at all. So I make a huge case about simplifying things as much as possible. And the last point is clear. Education is the catalyst for progress. Okay, without understanding about these matters, about the data, about investments, we don't speak a common language. If we don't speak a common language, we will not be able to integrate this stuff into investments and processes, and then we will not move on. And we need to move on pretty fast. So thank you very much.
Hey, thank you so much. May we first take a group photo before we move on to the Q&A section?
Take one more here, sorry. Okay, 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you. Thank you, René, and also Dr. Alex for the great sharing. I think it's a time for a very quick, fireside chat or panel. But I think there are a lot of questions from our audience. So may I just invite very quickly, Alex, René, and Valeria to join me on the panel first, very quickly. Do I have any burning questions from the floor right now? I'm sure there will be plenty, but if I may, I'll just very quickly have quick questions with each of you. So again, this is Anthony. I'm EFFAS representative in Asia, but I've also been having an honor to serving at HKU Business School as well. I've got 3 very quick questions, just learning from your sharing. For Alex, I remember you share about the scenarios that presented by the different bank A, B, C, and they have got very different, disclosures. I mean, the divergence of disclosure, is it because they're just simply from different regions or different jurisdictions? Like one is the European banks, one is Japanese, and that's the results for that. For René, my questions, I remember you shared with everyone about the very first sustainable fund in the world, Pioneer, at 1928. We are almost celebrating 100 years anniversary, and all the sustainability challenge still there. Does it mean that the sustainable investing approaches that have been developed over the years need a little bit of revamped or innovations beyond exclusions, best in class, etc.? And
And Valeria, I would love to learn a bit more about the new initiative of the climate risk analyst. So if shall I start with Alex, and we can move from there. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great question, Anthony. I think from memory, one's a Japanese bank, the other one's American, and it's a European one. So I can't remember which was which, but from what I saw, and these were just subsamples, right? But I didn't see any particular trend or any observation around which country or jurisdiction had better disclosures. They were just all over the place, right? So I think, and these were from banks that were not disclosing for the very first time. I think it's important to remember that. I think the only such report I can, and I'm sure there are others as well, but there's one done and released by the Reserve Bank of New Zealand that attempted to do something like that. So I'll encourage practitioners here or those who are interested to go and have a look at that report, where they actually looked at obviously all the disclosures that were done within New Zealand. But it's a very small, it's a subset, but because RBNZ was one of the first to put out mandatory disclosures, and they were trying to just make sense of it and to see how they've gone. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement, particularly those who are not reporting any results, right, in the first instance, as well as not addressing uncertainty in the results.
Can I add up something to the disclosure topic? I mean, disclosure is very important. So you have a standardized disclosure set up, same data, but do not make the mistake to correlate disclosure with same decisions. Okay, make me one example. So if you look at financial accounting, IFRS standards, so the data is very precise. That's top line, that's bottom line, EBIT, EBITDA, whatever it is. That's pretty well standardized. Now take any listed company on the stock exchange. Go to Tesla. Maybe Tesla is not a good example. Nestle, Novartis, or any other, and look at the analysts that are covering the company. Usually, 20-30% of the analysts say buy the company. 20-30% say hold, and the rest say sell. And these guys are looking at the same data points, which are highly standardized financial accounting measures, and come to totally different conclusions about owning or not owning the stock. And that's good. You have diversity of opinion, and that's what makes markets interesting. But the disclosure, at least, we are all talking the same language. Okay, then we can make different assessments about things, but the same language is absolutely crucial.
Valeria.
Thank you, Anthony. So I'm very pleased to inform here to the audience that we have a strong collaboration with Marsh McLennan, already started last year. And what we are currently doing, still not ready, will be launched very soon, but we are working in a new program. It's the EFFAS Certified Climate Risk Analyst. And of course, these programs is endorsed by the expertise of Marsh, with a global recognized authority in climate and risks and strategy as well. So this program is, you can imagine the similar structure as the CESGA. It covers all the core topics relevant to risk management. And I'm not to talk a lot about it because we are just in the next event to talk about it in deep. So what it's important to mention is, just as we saw with Alex's presentation, it's a lot of complexity there, right? And regarding these, our programs, the CESGA and also the new ECRA, are exactly doing this exercise for the professionals. We are transforming the complexity into practical application. So you can be, any CESGA holder can await great news, because it's a very interesting continuity path for your education journey. Thank you.
You were asking me about revamping the instruments. Well, yes and no. The instruments and the tools on sustainable investing are largely the same for approximately 100 years, okay, more or less. Exclusions, best in class. What has radically changed are two things. One thing is data. Okay, so data availability is here. So we don't have necessarily a data problem anymore on listed markets at least, but we still don't. I think we don't understand well enough how to extract value from the data on the investment side. Okay, and therefore the second element is you need to have platforms. So it's all a lot about technology. If you want to manage the value chain from the very start to the very end, and you are a larger asset manager, it's a lot of technological investments into data sources from marketing to administration. And that makes you more efficient, but also more efficacy. And the third element, sorry, is another one. What has changed probably is the focus on impact. And I'm talking here about sustainability impact. So maybe 25 years ago, you were talking about microfinance as being an impact-oriented strategy. Today, you have much more focusing on impact with regard to private equity, infrastructure investments, on the private credit side, and so on. And that has changed because basically when I sell a share and you buy it in a sustainable company, what did we achieve exactly? What did we achieve? Not much, probably. Okay, we just sell shares, listed shares. But if I generate new capital into a private equity startup, which is focusing on energy efficiency, and I generate new capital for that business, then I've generated probably an impact. Okay, and that's a big difference. I think that mindset is changing a little bit into private markets.
Thank you, René. I'm seeing a lot of practitioners and friends here in the space. My good friend Nana, head of sustainability and impacts, and stewardship, and a few others, either from the investors or from the buy side and sell side, and also on the academic field as well. Any questions from any of you?
Thanks, Anthony. I'm the head of sustainability for Impact Asset Management. So, René, in your speech, you just mentioned one of the first launched sustainable funds. I think it was launched by my company in US, by the Paxworld Fund, which we acquired in 2018. So, yeah, very interesting. And I think my company is doing all the things you're suggesting. But I have to say it's very difficult at this time. So, and as you mentioned, the US is going to be in the shadow in the near future. So, what's your suggestion to sustainable fund that's already doing this? How do we weather this headwind of the political tensions and also the policy changes? I think ISSB is also trying to adjusting some of the S2 requirements end of this month.
It's a very difficult question. Luckily, I'm in Europe and not in the US. So no, I think it's a little bit a model through strategy, I guess. So when I look at large US asset managers being BlackRock, Vanguard, like the big ones and others, they are making a few steps back of high profile initiatives like the Net Zero Asset Management Initiative or changing names in things, but maybe behind the scenes, not much is actually changing. Maybe the face in the front is changing, but behind the scenes, some things stay the same. Okay, so and that's by definition, I would say a model through a situation. I worked very closely with BlackRock Europe, so I know the guys them quite well, and Fidelity as well. And they've been having a hard time for the past 2-3 years, losing a lot of money in the United States, in red states from pension funds, being attacked in Europe because they don't do enough. And it's a tough situation to handle, especially if you're a large global players. Okay, and we are among the 5 largest owner of sustainable investing assets worldwide, just after BlackRock, Amundi, and DVS on sustainability. But we have the luck of being largely a Swiss asset manager focusing on Europe, so we are not that much addressed by the political climate in the US. But that's not going to go away, probably.
So I have one question for René and another question for general, all of you. So you mentioned about kind of, I think a very important discussion is that you have a lot of data, but there are some people who are good at using the data, so they yield alpha on the markets, and some analysts who don't have the capacity or don't know how to do it. So of course they would underperform. But I would like to know from your perspective, how do you use the data, right? So exactly what information are you looking when you're making investment decisions, and what are the key things that right now you're focusing on? And that's a general question. That's your question. More general question is also touched a bit, being touched upon just now, is really the discussion of AI. So are you concerned that this fast development of AI is actually making greenwashing easier? In particular, for example, now it's the cost of writing a good ESG report or sustainability report becomes so low right now, and basically all the companies able to write lengthy, and at least from the report itself looks informative, maybe not very accurate, but they are able to do that in a very low cost and in a very efficient way, which I think would really impose the challenges for future analysts and also asset managers to look into those data and to utilize them. And how do you see the impacts of AI on disclosure and on also investment?
On the first question, so we're lucky that we had a history on of a sustainability in-house research in the asset management dating back to '94. So for the first roughly 10 years, we collected data ourselves all over the world, send out questionnaires to companies, 30 pages. The questioners came back with data. We inputted the data into a platform, generated our own ratings for hundreds and thousands of companies. That was the first 10 years. 2004, I took over the team and we made a decision. I made a decision to create more efficiency and breadth because I wanted to have a larger coverage of companies. So I sourced raw data. I started to source raw ESG data from different providers, never from one, but in order to create our own methodology. But the analysts were still looking at the company by company base. And we worked like that for another 10, 12 years. 2016, 17, I switched another organizational type. I dissolved the sustainability research team. So no more sustainability analysts, but every financial analyst had to become a ESG analyst the same. So we partnered up with SESG a few years later, and we had 100 or 150 SESGA certificates for financial analysts and portfolio managers. And at the same time, I hired a team of 4 ESG data scientists. Okay, these were quantitative finance specialists focusing on ESG data, and they built a platform on the basis of our history, which now allows us to create with our own methodology, roughly coverage of 35,000 entities on the bond and listed equity and multi-asset space. And that allows us to have a full coverage. I can explain the rating on a granular level to every single institutional investor. So it's not a black box, it's an open box. What we use ESG raw data from 5 different data providers. MSCI is among them, Sustainalytics, ISS, specialized climate risk data, and we aggregate the data according to our needs. Maybe different for equities than for fixed income, maybe different for utilities than for insurance companies. So it's very specific and detailed, okay? And the portfolio manager and the financial analyst has access to the platform. He sees the ratings for every single entity. He sees the complete aggregated rating for a portfolio. He can dig into CO2 emissions, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. He sees the climate reduction task. He sees exclusion criteria. He sees everything in an instant in a platform. And that allows us to be very transparent, but also efficient in the way we deal with that.
Well, in fact, let me just chip in. So amongst my many hats, my day job is actually I head up the ESG function at one of the largest hedge fund, the fund guy, in Asia. And 2 weeks ago, there was the HSBC Global Investment Summit, very eventful, alongside with the Rugby Sevens, etc. So a lot of the C-suites are in Hong Kong. And this year, my team focuses on engaging and meeting with CFOs on hospitality business. So I'm meeting the CFOs of Hilton Group, Accor, etc. Okay, to answer Professor Guojun's questions on whether AI will be assisting greenwashing, I would say that it's actually the skill set of mastering AI, and it would actually help you to doing a lot of this work. So before those engagement meetings with those CFOs, I've actually asked Perplexity to help me to look at and dig out all the reports and also all the informations from this ESG reporting and sustainable financing schedules, and how that link with all its ESG metrics link with the executive compensation. And I bring that into the meeting. I think the takeaways that I've got is that it's not just having the likes of Paul or Perplexity or GPT to help you to distill the informations. Perplexity bluff as well, right? Even they do dig out information from the public domain. But you, as the analyst, would have the know-how and understanding of which part of it is bluffing, and which links that on sources that you go over to, so that you would be able to make the adjustments of the questions in front of the CFOs. And I could tell from the response of the co-CFO, she's actually pretty amazed with the questions that I've got for her. And on Friday that week, I was actually teaching a class at HKU. And the thing that I do is that I actually show them the questions that's generated by Perplexity. And I actually ask all my cohorts and students in the class to try to write a prompt in their whatever AI model and try to come up with a comparable sets of it. And I think that's what is mean by upskilling.
I
René.
think that it will imply a higher level of productivity. So with the example that we just heard. At the same time, well, you need to understand the answers you get from the questions. And understanding the answers from all these companies requires, in my opinion, so maybe I'm too old now, but requires experience over time. So if you want to understand a sector, like the energy sector or the insurance sector or the chemical sector or whatever sector, you need to understand the cycles that the sector is going through. You need to understand what drives the top line, are the costs, where is the bottom line, how are they managing changes over time with regard to sustainability risks and opportunities. I mean, basically every sustainability risk is a huge opportunity. Why? Because if the sustainability risk is real, the market should provide solutions, products and services. And if the solutions are good, this will generate growth. Okay? And if I'm able to generate profitable growth, I found an excellent investment. And it starts with the challenges that we have. Okay? And therefore, understanding how these challenges work in the details of every single sector and company usually requires experience and educational effort.
In terms of AI, just a quick one to maybe provide a slightly different angle. I think because if sustainability is viewed as public interest, and I think it is, that's why all the regulators around the world are taking a keen, maybe some may say heavy-handed, but others may say a required, or maybe, required approach. I'm just thinking back to my experience in Japan pricing for catastrophe risks, earthquake risk, for example, right? It's not even climate, but how do you price for a 1 in 1,000-year event, 1 in 500-year event probability, right? And sometimes with all the data that you have available, as René has mentioned, you could just chuck into a black box. AI is so powerful these days, and it'll come up with a premium for you, right? But because it's also public interest, the JFSA or the HKMA equivalent of Japan actually requires insurance companies to provide transparent methodologies for how these prices, how risk is being calculated and then, charged onto customers because of that public interest element. So what I'm trying to say is that maybe in practice it's not easy, but it takes a very skilled analyst to unstrip between AI and non-AI, responses, but also regulators need to step up. Right?
And AI will not help you to the for the time being in discover these very rare but nevertheless happening tail risk events. Okay, so the market corrections 2 3 weeks ago in one day, there was a tail event that is we call that 3 sigma event. So 3 sigma event should happen every, I don't know, 100,000 years, but it just happened. Okay, it just happened, destroyed incredible value. Okay, it happened 10 years ago in the financial crisis as well. So they are not supposed to happen or happen every 1,000 years, but they do happen. And I'm not sure if AI can predict that. I'm not sure, because basically you need to input that, the human need to input the data in order for AI to understand that. So we use AI in our investment decision making since 2 3 years. It works, but I still very keen to have a human overview of what kind of algorithms are we using, fast, mid, or long-term tracking, and things like that, because that will still be very, very important, I think.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. And I think AI doesn't give you any insight if you don't understand what you're looking at. So when I talked about climate losses earlier, if you ask a hydrologist, they'll say, well, because why do the damages look so low? That's because we haven't seen massive water shortages that result in people migrating away from areas that are not livable anymore. If you ask the biodiversity specialists or biologists, they'll tell you, well, at 4 degrees, there'll be no more pollination. And without pollination, how can you grow food, right? And if you ask like a town planner, they might go, well, everyone's building in all these cities that are now going to be underwater in sea level rise. So it depends on who you ask, right? And without that subject matter expertise, AI is not going to I think AI is not going to get us all collectively closer to a more enlightened position. It's going to give you some numbers, but how they're just numbers.
Do I have any final questions from the floor? If not, I've got my final question. So if you look at this delegation, we've got 3 PhD and doctors, or in fact, together with President Zaballos, we've got 4 PhDs here. So I'm the most intellectually modest and humble guy on the delegation. But I want to learn from you all, like what are the, could be papers or topics that you guys are looking at these days that most excites you or concerns you? From any of you.
We are currently discussing about our target audience. Right? So I'm interested for the moment in reading some literature about employability, like what makes a human resource department select one candidate compared to another when you have similar, for example, academic degrees. You are talking, interesting from this is the things what I learned about this is certifications play a crucial role in the transition from the university to the first employment, but also from the first employment to a better position. So there is the moment where they looked really at these certifications that young professionals may have. And this was not really our target before. So we are now trying to find an appropriate way to approach more and in a, of course, more engaging way to universities. So this is something that currently is maintaining me interested.
I'm looking at scope 4 emissions. So basically, we talked about not the non-existence of or the non-usability of scope 3, scope 4, which are potentially avoided CO2 emissions in the future. Okay, and why is that important for me? I built up the private equity department 6-7 years ago, so we have different private equity programs running. And as I explained before, from the impact perspective, basically I give new capital to companies. Okay, I'm not just switching capital on listed, I give new capital. And with regard to the sustainability challenge, I want to be able to show the decarbonization cases that I finance. And basically, if I finance a electric vehicle startup. Okay, then I want to be able to show over time what is the replace value in CO2 terms of that product in comparison to the average fossil combustion machine. And that delta is potentially avoided emission scope 4, which is very early, huge uncertainty on a scientific level, but is an important message because it would incentivize switches from one technology to another and evidence how much CO2 reduction and decarbonization effect you could have into the future if that technology really grows in the future.
And mine's a little bit, yeah. No, mine's a little bit away from my core, more statistics and everything else. But I've been delving a little bit into behavioral economics, and then looking. There you go. Jesús may have an opinion, and in particular the work of Howard Conreuter. He's recently passed away. But and also knowledge resistance by Michael Klintman. So if you read these, they'll explain to you, like, you know, for people like me, producing another report that says, well, climate change is going to get worse, it's not going to shock anybody into action, right? So this paper really looks at the attitudes of people. So for example, in the United States, why is it that people in New Jersey, sitting on the coastline, they actually, you know, price into those climate devaluations, whereas in Florida, we talked about this yesterday, that's so it's on my mind now. In Florida, red state, very real climate experience, right? Lived climate experience, but they are not responding in the same way. In Valencia, in Spain, right? They responded, you know, where irrational way. You know, they're like, why didn't we prepare? But then in the US, when you have a very strong hurricane that comes in, not everywhere, but into these red states, they would be more, you know, they will more be reluctant to accept that climate is actually impacting them, although it is, right? So that's a really interesting aspect, because if, again, to those incentives, if you don't even feel it, and everyone can feel it now, then how can you motivate the right kind of action? And also drawing from, let's say, Montreal Protocol, you know, the world has done it before. I mean, maybe different scale of a challenge, but with ozone layer, we collectively, right, tragedy of the commons, but the whole world came together to solve that problem in a fairly amazing way. But, you know, climate probably is, you know, an extension of that. So how do we get there? And I think this might be the missing link, one of the missing links.
Thank you so much. Can we all join to thank the delegations from EFFAS and the great minds?
Okay, thank you again for joining today's events. I think we do have some snacks over there. So if you want to stay around and talk with the speakers, we do have a few more minutes. And again, thank you very much for coming to Hong Kong U for this wonderful sharings and discussions.